Hello and welcome to our webinar, PMP Right for Me, a crash course on the benefits of the Project Management Professional Certification, hosted by Pluralsight author Casey Ayers. I'm Lindsay Locke from Pluralsight, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you what to expect within the next hour. First, I'd like to draw your attention to the chat box in your webinar control panel. Casey will be answering questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions throughout the chat box during the presentation. Be sure to tweet about your experience today with our hashtag, PluralsightLive. We'll be choosing a winner at random for a free month of training with Pluralsight. After you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to take a short survey. We'd love to hear from you, so please take a few minutes to complete it. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll email you the link in a few days. And with that, thank you for joining us. Let's welcome Casey Ayers.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good to be here today, and thank you to all of you for joining us. As she said, I am Casey Ayers. I have a PMP myself and also an MBA from the Crummer School of Business at Rollins College down in Winter Park, Florida. By day, I'm a strategic consultant for a variety of different companies. I've worked in healthcare and digital media and mobile app development, and also run some of my own entrepreneurial ventures. And then I also author Pluralsight project management courses as well, and that's what I'm here to speak with you today about. So in today's webinar, we're going to break this down into 4 major segments. First, we'll talk about some of the key statistics and benefits related to the PMP certification. Then we'll look at the PMP exam, its prerequisites, and overview some of the content that you can expect to see on the exam. What is it you'll be tested on? Then we'll look at the application process, what it is that you need to go through in order to apply and be able to take the exam. And then finally, we'll dive a little bit into the actual contents and curriculum of the PMP, the type of things that you need to know, what you'll be expected to study prior to taking the exam. So first, let's look at some of those key stats and benefits. The PMP is the most important and widely recognized certification for project management. It's globally recognized by governments, commercial companies, nonprofits, and a variety of other organizations. And it's also issued exclusively by the Project Management Institute. Now, if you're familiar with other certifications, such as different levels of Six Sigma, you may know that there are different requirements that are met by each different training institute or company that might help provide those different levels of belts or levels of competence. But that's not true with the PMP. There is one issuing authority. Everyone who has a PMP has earned it the same way, by studying the same kind of core material and by passing the same type of exam. The PMP has been developed by project managers for project managers, and it dates back as far as the 1960s when project managers in aerospace and engineering and defense began to come together and realize that there were some common terminologies and common tools and techniques that they were able to use regardless of the industry they worked in. Since then, over the decades, it's evolved into the Project Management Institute and eventually into the PMP exam as we know it today. Now, the PMP is an extraordinarily popular certification for a wide variety of good reasons. Today, there are over 618,000 PMPs worldwide, and you can find them in over 104 countries, which helps to highlight the fact that this truly is a globally recognized and important certification. So who is the PMP for? Well, initially, as I said, it dates back to the days of aerospace and defense being major areas in the 1960s. Since then, it also grew to encompass construction, education, healthcare, and, as many of you are probably familiar, information technology. However, it's also a valid certification and very useful in a broader range of industries. These include automotive design, education, entertainment, finance, food and beverage, gaming, logistics, manufacturing, telecom, utilities, and much more. Basically, any industry that can benefit from projects benefits from project managers who have a PMP certification. Now think back over the past few years. Remember back to 2008 and the Great Recession. Since then, a lot of the priority for businesses has been to cut back and to find ways to be more efficient, to restructure, and to become leaner, meaner organizations. But we're in a different time now. It's been 7 years since then, and in a lot of cases, almost as much fat as possible has already been trimmed. Companies still need ways that they can grow revenue, grow earnings, find ways to continue to expand their business or to better their position within the marketplace. And today, that means creating new business value. Now, you can create some by continuing to become more and more efficient, for sure. But if you want to create a lot of business value all at once, you really need to create either a new product or a new service, a new initiative, a new way of doing business. Whatever the case may be, that's a unique output that comes from a project that has a defined beginning and end. Projects drive business value, and that's why having a PMP, which allows you to effectively manage projects, is so valuable in a wide variety of industries. The PMP provides a versatile set of frameworks that are useful in almost any project environment. So let's say you work in an agile environment or one that's more traditional in nature in the way that projects are handled. It doesn't matter. A PMP is actually relevant to both of these because it's not based on a specific methodology being followed, but rather it provides a framework within those methodologies can fit. It equips you with a common language that allows you to communicate with other project managers, both within and without your organization. You may not have the same specialty that others do, and perhaps you need to work with multiple projects, or you have to work as part of a joint venture between multiple companies in order to complete an objective. But you can at least share a common language when you're speaking about project-based issues, such as constraints like cost and time, resources, etc. You'll be on a level footing with others. And perhaps most importantly, having a PMP leaves you better prepared for the daily challenges of project management. The things that you have to do every day to lead your team and to help drive new ways to be effective and efficient in your project, the PMP will help in these regards. From a career perspective, the PMP can be an outstanding resume builder, and that's for a variety of reasons. One, it's a highly sought-after certification, but two, it's because of what having that certification means. It indicates that you not only have a high level of project management knowledge, especially in terms of the formal tools and techniques that you can use as a project manager, but it also means that you have an underlying threshold of experience that is very valuable as a project manager. After all, you can't earn your PMP unless you already have a certain amount of experience within project management, and we'll discuss that more in just a few minutes. Having a PMP demonstrates a commitment to project management as a career and as a profession. In some cases, some folks may be very good and very capable at their specialization, but they prefer to do that frontline work and not take on that leadership role necessarily. They may be drafted into it from time to time, but it may not be an area that they want to pursue. For others, being able to lead a team and take on that broader vision is a priority, and that's something that they really strive to do. Having a PMP shows that that helps to describe what you want out of your career, that you are looking to be able to take on that broader vision, that broader role, and to be able to lead a team to success. Perhaps most importantly, having a PMP is required for many project management positions. You can't even apply or at least have a very valid chance of your application going through unless you already have a PMP. And in many other cases, especially when you're dealing with government contractors and things of this nature, you'll find that many positions, if they don't require a PMP, will at minimum require a candidate to agree to earn their PMP within their first 12 months on the job. So whatever the case may be, certainly already having that PMP in place gives you a leg up over candidates who might be required to earn one if they don't have one already. So let's talk about money for a minute. Having a PMP can be very valuable. In fact, PMP certified project managers on average earn about $10,000 more per year than non-certified project managers do. That's a big reason why the PMP has been decided as the #1 IT certification by both CIO Magazine and the IT Skills and Salary Report in recent years. It's a great way to be able to earn extra money, and the money helps to prove that having a PMP is in demand. Businesses and organizations are willing to pay more for someone who has a background with this certification. Just as importantly, having a PMP also helps to expand your networking and career opportunities. That's both through the local PMI chapter, which has other certified project management professionals, and then also just through different tools like LinkedIn, for example. Being able to advertise that you have a PMP makes you more readily available and visible to those who may be looking to recruit for certain positions. They'll see that you've got that underlying experience and be more interested in you as a candidate. So what does it take to be able to take the PMP exam? And what can you expect on the exam itself? Well, there's a mixture of 3 different requirements to take the PMP. 1, you need to have a formal education background that will help to dictate how much project management experience you need. Then 3rd, you also need to have formal training specifically in project management techniques. When it comes to formal education, you're not required to have a college degree in order to earn a PMP, but it does help. You just need to have a secondary degree by minimum, which is either a high school diploma, an associate's degree, or its global equivalent. If you have a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree, or its global equivalent, then the requirement for experience is lessened somewhat. If you have that secondary degree, then you're looking at about 7,500 hours of project management experience as a requirement, in addition to 60 months of managing projects. If you have a 4-year degree, this experience requirement is a little more lenient. You're looking at 4,500 hours of project management experience and 36 months in total before being able to apply for the exam. Now, what's the difference? It sounds like we're kind of talking at cross purposes here. Hours, months, why are we double counting this? Well, in reality, months and hours are counted differently as far as the Project Management Institute is concerned. Hours are allowed to overlap, but months may not. So let's say, for example, that you worked 500 hours apiece on 2 different projects lasting 6 months. One goes from January until June, and the other goes from April until October. Well, you're allowed to count all 1,000 of those hours, the 500 from each, so long as it fits the other requirements we'll say in a minute, but you can't double count the months during which they overlapped. You didn't work 12 months just because you had 6 months on each project. Rather, you worked 10 months because you were working on both projects combined from January until October. So hopefully that helps to clear up the difference between hours and months. PMI wants to make sure that you not only have an extensive amount of time that you spend in project management, but also that that experience has taken place over a broader period of time, because then you'll be more likely to be exposed to more of the challenges that project managers face, rather than if you are earning all of your hours in a very frenetic pace very quickly. Now, you're not supposed to count more than 40 hours per week of project management work. I know that if your job's anything like what mine have been in the past, then often you may end up working more than 40 hours. PMI does believe in a work-life balance, though, and this is one way that they help to enforce that, is that they don't want you to use more than 40 hours per week in your experience requirement. You also can only use experience that you've accrued within the past 8 years. So if a decade or more in the past, for example, you have experience substantially of managing projects and you'd like to take your career back in that direction, you may need to accrue additional more recent experience in order to be eligible to take the exam. And most importantly, only project management experience is applicable. So if you are spending time managing tasks related to the ongoing administration of your company, that time would not count toward this requirement. Only time that you spend directly on a project, which has a defined beginning and end and has a unique product as its output. Now, projects can be very short, lasting just a week or two, or they could take place over years or decades even in the case of very big projects. So long as they have that defined start and end time, they'd be considered a project, though, and you can count that experience. You don't have to have been in charge of the entire thing either. So you don't have to be the overriding project manager. Rather, you could be in charge of just a small subset. Perhaps you help to supervise a team of coders working on a particular feature for a new application. that would count. That's eligible experience for this requirement. Now, regardless of what your educational background might be or how you've gone about earning your experience, all applicants are required to have 35 hours of formal project management training prior to taking the PMP exam. Again, there's no difference in this requirement based on your educational history. So whether you're coming in with a high school diploma or a graduate degree, you still have to earn 35 hours of formal training prior to taking the exam. Now, this training can cover a wide variety of different project management subjects, things like cost management, scope management, how to manage communications or stakeholder relationships, how to handle risk and how to identify risk within a project. All of these are valid areas of project management training, and all of them will be very needed when it comes time to take your test. Now, you can get these hours from a variety of different sources. You can obtain them through PMI registered education providers for one, and this is perhaps the best way to do so because these hours are pre-approved by PMI. A small fraction of applications are randomly selected for audit, as we'll discuss in a little while. And if your application were to come under audit, then in that case you'd have to be able to submit syllabi or notes from a professor, something that can help to validate the experience that you've already earned in the past. But this way you're good to go. If you come under audit and you've taken your courses through a PMI registered education provider, you don't need to worry about this. I'm happy to say that Pluralsight is one such registered education provider. So project management courses you take with Pluralsight fulfill this requirement and will make life easier for you if that case were to arise. Company-sponsored programs are another great way to earn these training hours. Your company may put on seminars or training sessions related to project management, and these can count as long as they speak on project management subjects. Training companies that offer boot camps to prepare you for earning this certification are another route that you can go through, as are college courses on project management. Now, let's say that you take a college accounting course. You can't count the entire course toward your project management training requirement unless the entire course is about managing projects and accounting therein. But let's say that you spend a week or two of that semester talking about project-based accounting. Well, yes, you can count those hours, be it 3 or 6, however many hours that might have been. You are allowed to use that subset of a course, even if the whole course isn't dedicated to that subject alone. Finally, distance learning companies are also another area where you can get this formal training requirement fulfilled so long as there is an end-of-course assessment of some sort that you can take. So what should you expect on the exam itself? Well, you're looking at a total of 200 questions on the PMP exam. Of these, 175 will be scored and 25 are unscored. Now, if you can remember back to the SAT or perhaps more recently GRE or GMAT, then you may know that in some of these standardized tests, an entire section is included that's experimental in nature, where those questions are not going to be graded, but instead are used because they might be repurposed for use on a future exam. So they're collecting statistical information about whether or not these are good questions to use. Well, that's true here as well, but there's not a section. Rather, those 25 questions are sprinkled in between the scored questions throughout the course of the exam. So you want to make sure to do your best throughout the entire 200 questions for sure. You'll be given 4 hours during which you can take the exam, and there are no scheduled breaks during this period. However, that doesn't mean that you're locked to your chair by any means. For the vast majority of exam applicants, you'll be taking this at a prometric testing center of some sort. There are proctors there. You can raise your hand. They can pause your computer and allow you to step away if you need to use the restroom, get a drink of water, just stretch out for a moment, or get away from the screen and kind of clear your mind before continuing. Just know that you're going to have 4 hours in total, so don't stray away for too long. Now, the test is computer-based in nature, but it's not adaptive, so questions don't get harder or easier as you go. Rather, whatever the questions are for the test, those are what they're going to be. Now, this is good news for you because it means that it's easy to go back and forth between different questions and be able to mark questions that you might want to return to later. Perhaps there's a question early in the exam that you weren't sure about, but then your memory was jogged by the way a question later in the exam was phrased. That's great. You can go back and check that earlier question and change your answer if you would like, right up until you submit your test at the very end. The PMP is a pass-fail test by nature, so there's not a numerical score that will be printed out and given to you at the end. Rather, you'll simply earn your PMP or you won't. Now, there is a subgrading criteria that does take place for each of the different 5 process groups that we'll speak about in a minute. You can earn a proficient score, which is the best, a moderately proficient score, or a not proficient score. Now, it is possible in many cases to pass the exam even if you finish one section with a not proficient metric, but obviously you want to strive for that full level of proficiency for all 5 process groups. So what do you need to get as far as a score? What are we looking at percentage-wise here? Well, I have bad news, and that is I don't know. In fact, no one does, because it's different for every test taker. All of the 200 questions are assembled from a large question bank that PMI has that helps to randomize each different test. Some of these questions, of course, are harder and some are easier than others. And PMI adjusts the scoring criteria based on those factors. If you get a test that has more hard questions than another, then your passing criteria would probably be lower. Whereas if you get a test that happens to be composed of more easy questions, then you may need to get more of those right in order to pass. It'll change from person to person. When taking practice tests, a good benchmark is you want to be somewhere between perhaps 70 and 80%. But again, arguments vary in terms of what that number should actually be. And when it comes to your specific test, no one can say for sure. You just want to do the best you can. The test is split up into 5 different components that have to do with the different phases and process groups of project management. 13% of the test is dedicated to initiation. This is the very beginning of a project, when its business case is laid out, when a project charter is formed, and typically when a project manager is brought into the environment. Planning is when the initial project management plan and all of the sub-plans related to risk and communications, and scope, time, cost, quality, human resources, where all of those plans are first made. That's 24%, a very substantial chunk of the exam. The bulk of the exam is also aligned with the bulk of the project work. 30% is dedicated to executing, which is when you're actually doing most of the work related to the project. But almost as important is monitoring and controlling throughout the entire project lifecycle. You are constantly making sure that your plans align with what you're trying to accomplish, that what you are accomplishing aligns with your plans, and so on. So monitoring and controlling is continuous throughout. And then closing is the smallest part of the exam, but also important because that's when you tie everything up at the end of a project and can hand its final result off either to a customer or a client or to an operational division within your company. Next, let's talk about the application process. Now, your application has to be completed at PMI.org, which is the Project Management Institute's website. First, you'll need to input your project management experience. For each different project that you've worked on, you'll need to input different information. You need to not just estimate the total number of hours that you spent on a project, but also the amount of hours spent within each of the processes I just mentioned: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. You'll need to do your best to estimate how long you spent in each. Now, don't worry. You don't have to have experience in each process group for each project. Rather, you just need to have as little as 1 hour of experience in each of these different process groups. So let's say that you were brought into a project midstream in order to help with a time crunch. They needed to crash the project in order to accomplish an objective or meet a milestone more quickly. You can count that experience even if it's just in the executing phase and even if you spent very little time in initiating or closing on that project. For each project, you have to include a short written explanation of your work and also the project management skills that you employed in the doing of that project. Now, you'll gain the vocabulary that you need in order to well defend the project work you've done as part of your PMP training. So that will leave you well prepared in order to write these explanations. My recommendation is to use your largest and most easily verified project work on the application. It's important to know that it's only going to allow you to input up to the 4,500 hour mark or up to the 7,500 hour mark. Whatever project is the last one you input that throws you above that threshold, that's it. You can't enter any more. So there's no point in trying to show your prodigious project management experience. I have 15,000 hours that I'd like to put in. The system simply won't let you. So go with the largest projects first and the ones that are most easily verified, because if you come under audit and you need someone to stick up for your experience, then you'll have less people that you have to contact in that case. After you put in your experience, you need to also add in your formal training hours and the sources from which you acquired that training. All training and experience has to be accrued prior to completing your application. So you can begin work on your application if you know that you're about to wrap up training, if you'd like to get a leg up on putting in all that experience, since that will take the most time on the application. But you only have 90 days during which you can work on it. So don't get started too soon before you have all of your experience and training in line. Once you've submitted your application, there will be a completeness review done by PMI, and you'll learn the status within 5 days. If anything's missing, they'll let you know if there are any errors or things that you need to go back and review. Otherwise, they'll tell you that it's time to submit payment for your PMP. You can do that at that point as soon as the completeness review is finished, and it's after you have submitted payment you'll immediately be notified whether you can now schedule the exam or whether your application has come under review for an audit. Now, a very small fraction of applications are randomly audited, and it is random. There's no telltale sign that's more or less likely to get you audited. This isn't like doing your taxes. It is supposed to be a truly random process here, and it is a small percentage. Now, if you do get audited, there shouldn't be anything to worry about so long as you have been clear and accurate in the way that you filled out your experience and your training requirements thus far. You'll receive information from PMI, and they'll let you know that you need to have your experience verified by either a colleague or a peer or a supervisor or even a client that you worked with on a project in the past, someone who can verify that what you say you did is what you did. And then you'll also need to do the same for your formal training, often in the form of submitting a certificate that would be given as a certificate of completion or a transcript if you received your training through college courses. Now, once you've either been approved or your audit has passed with flying colors, at that point you have a year to schedule your exam. And again, that's based on application approval date. So if you need to go through that audit, that's not going to cut into the amount of time that you have during which you could take the exam. However, even though you have a full year, I recommend that you schedule your exam as quickly as possible after your application has been approved. After all, you put in a ton of work to get to this point, and there's no use waiting longer unless you absolutely have to. After all, you finished your formal training probably pretty recently, and therefore all of this information is as clear in your mind and as up-to-date as it's going to be. And so you'll want to go ahead and take it quickly. But also, should you need to retake the exam, it's important to note you can take it up to 3 times during the 1-year period. And so the sooner you take it, the more time you leave yourself in case you do need to revisit the exam later on. Now, the moment that you receive your score, or your grading report rather, at the end of taking the exam, you'll know if you passed or failed. And as long as you passed, you're immediately considered a PMP. From that moment until 3 years down the road, your PMP will be active and your certification will be valid. However, the PMP is a living certification. You don't earn it once and then hold it for life. You have to continue to do more work in order to continue to hold it thereafter. This comes in the form of professional development units, or PDUs. It's a continuing education requirement that has to be met every 3 years to maintain an active PMP. Now, you can earn PDUs through a variety of different avenues. You can take classes that help to further enhance your project management skills. You can donate your time to the local PMI chapter or to a nonprofit that needs assistance with project management. You can even create courses or write academic documents or or different ways like this of contributing back to the field of project management in order to help fulfill some of these requirements. There are a variety of ways to meet it. It's just important to know that you do have to continue to work on your PMP for the long run. Okay, so finally, let's take a look at the actual contents and curriculum of the PMP. What should you expect to learn here? What's kind of the broad roadmap of what you might need to know and follow when studying for and preparing for the exam? Well, the exam covers information found in the Project Management Body of Knowledge, also known as the PMBOK Guide. This is the key document released by the Project Management Institute and has been for a number of years now. We're up to the 5th edition at this point, and it's continued to refine the generally accepted and generally applicable frameworks of project management that can apply to a wide variety of different project scenarios. It defines core management concepts for projects and describes the way that the project management life cycle it will go about for most projects from beginning to end, what you can expect throughout most projects, and then also the different ways that organizational factors can impact projects, be it the way that your company or organization is built out and structured, who has authority over whom, what level of authority a project manager has over different team members, how to deal with the interpersonal skills and necessary requirements there, or and so on and so forth. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there are the 5 main processes, which are initiation, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. This is how the exam is generally structured, but it's best to think of this as only one of 2 axes on which the PMP's content is overlaid. If this is the x-axis, then we would consider the y-axis to be the 10 different knowledge areas. These are just as important and tend to go throughout all of the different process groups. These include integration management. These are the tools, techniques, and processes that you need in order to tie everything together. There are a lot of different moving components in a project. Everything from managing the budget to managing who's on board, the actual project work itself, identifying and being able to take care of risk, ensure that quality is in place, that we're sticking to plan, and so on. Integration management helps to handle all of that, as well as any changes that need to be made during the project environment. It provides that formal avenue through which changes can be managed. Scope management helps to ensure that we're accomplishing the project objectives as according to the project charter and the project management plan, that we're not either exceeding that by adding in features that are unnecessary and add in more time or cost, and that also that we're not coming in below target, that we're doing everything that we need to do. Time management is also important, making sure that we're able to stay on schedule, and how we adapt if we're not, through either fast tracking or crashing or finding ways to help to optimize our schedule and determine also what the critical path may be for all of the different tasks that must be done before reaching the end of the project. Cost management is self-explanatory in nature, but also obviously pivotal. Depending on the different constraints and priorities of your project, cost may be a chief factor, or you may need to just simply be able to manage it and ensure that things are as efficient as they can be while you race full speed ahead. Quality management is making sure that not only the product that is the end result is coming out at the levels that we need it to, but that also the way that we do things along the way is in a fashion that helps to ensure a high level of quality from the beginning. So we're not just checking quality at the end, we're assuring quality throughout the entire project. Human resource management, again, self-explanatory, ensuring that you have the right people for the project in place, but also navigating some of the other factors that can come in. If you're working with a partner or a client, for example, or if you're part of a joint venture, if you only have a certain level of authority over people who may be periphery but also very important to your project, how to navigate issues like that. Communications management is how you not only communicate with your team, but also with the outside world and with third parties that may be involved. So if you have a contractor or if you are relying on an outside expert to assist in a project, how you communicate with them is just as important as the way that you communicate with your own team. Risk management is obviously taking care of all the different risk factors that can arise, these and figuring out which ones have the highest probability and the highest levels of potential damage, and how to not just be able to combat these or avoid these, but be able to leverage these if possible and turn risks into opportunities. Procurement management is the process of bringing in all those outside resources from third parties that may be necessary to bring your project to completion. And then stakeholder management is making sure that you're keeping everyone informed, abreast, and content as possible in the project environment, while realizing people will have differing priorities and you'll need to navigate those to help minimize conflict. Now, these 5 process groups are dictated by when during a project or during a process is most normally useful or needed. So you may see a process appear within a process group because that's when it typically happens. Planning takes place during planning normally. But that doesn't mean that you might not need to revisit it while you're in the full-fledged executing phase of your project. So they can differ and move from time to time. We simply place them where they'll be found most often. The knowledge areas will be sorted depending on the different area of expertise that's needed. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory in the name. If it has to do with cost, it's cost management, scope management, and so on. In total, between these 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas, there are 47 total project management processes. Each of these features a variety of inputs, outputs, and employs a variety of tools and techniques to help you get project work done. Now, each of these processes belongs to both a process group and a knowledge area. So for example, if we are planning cost management, you will find that in the cost management knowledge area and also in the planning process group. Now, this may seem like a lot of work or a lot of information that you need to have. I mean, 47 processes is pretty staggering. That's a lot of information to know. Well, it's true. The PMP does require work. There's a reason that training requirement is there. But the curriculum is actually more accessible than you might think at first. That's because the vast majority of it is based on common sense and standard business practices. You're probably already familiar with a lot of the key content that a PMP needs to know. You just may not use the formal terminology associated with it, or you may not know necessarily the specifics, but at least you are familiar in the abstract. So being able to just fill in a lot of areas where you already will probably have some sense of what's going on makes this much easier than it might seem on the surface. It's also why having that experience is so key. It makes this content more relatable. They're not just requiring that you have a substantial amount of experience because it makes the certificate more prestigious or it helps to limit the people who can apply. You really need this background in order to succeed on the test. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about what we're doing here at Pluralsight in relation to the PMP. There are a series of courses related to the PMP that can help prepare you for the exam that are presently in development, and I'm working on those. Now, the first one is already available, and I'm happy to let you know that the second course is actually already available too. It actually went up on Tuesday, a little earlier than we expected, so you can go ahead and find both of those now. The third one is already in active development. Now, these courses will count toward that mandatory training requirement that must be met before applying for the PMP exam. And the goal is to have in excess of 35 hours of content for you so that you can get all of the training you need in one place. And as I said earlier, Pluralsight is a registered education provider with PMI. So if you earn the credit through Pluralsight, you'll be good to go, and your content, your curriculum will certainly count toward that requirement. Now, the series of courses, I'm sorry, I think we have the same slide twice here, so let me work through this real quick. So let's give you the brief roadmap of where we're at so far with these Pluralsight courses. The first one is called Introduction to Project Management and the PMP Exam, and it covers some of the same material we have already today, but in much greater. So I go in and show you what the actual application process looks like. We talk more about the experience requirement and how to navigate that, the benefits of joining PMI, the ways to take the PMP in the most cost-effective fashion possible, and so on. In the second course, we really begin to dive into a lot of the core curriculum that you'll need to know in order to succeed on the exam. And this includes organizational structure and influences, the way that your company is built can influence how your project takes place, and then also the project management life cycle, the general cycle that you can expect all projects to follow from beginning to end. In total, we expect about 13 courses to be included in this entire PMP learning path. And again, this should make in excess of 35 hours of total formal training, which will fulfill that training requirement that you'll need for the exam. So that's what I have for you today. If you'd like to keep in touch, feel free to reach out to me directly, Twitter, LinkedIn, email, whatever works best for you, and also to Pluralsight if you'd like to follow along there. So I'll be happy to take any questions you have at this time. Lindsay, do we have any questions we want to share?
Sure. Thanks, Casey. Let me read through some of the questions that came through during your presentation. I've got someone that's asking if you could please compare PMI ACP with PMI for software professionals in particular. Do you still see the benefit of PMP when software is becoming more and more agile?
You know, I do, because while that is certainly a great certification to have, I would recommend it in conjunction with a PMP if possible, because a PMP provides you with the more generalized background that you'll need in a variety of project environments. So I certainly don't see Agile as a fad by any sort. There are clear benefits to Agile as a methodology, but combining that methodology of Agile with the broader frameworks of the PMP can help give you the best mix in order to succeed both in that environment and then also when dealing with environments that may not be Agile in nature.
Great. I've got Bradley asking, specifically when it relates to project management training hours, how long do those hours remain valid?
So those hours are valid over the course of 8 years. So as long as you've earned them within the past 8 years now, they will go ahead and count toward that requirement. So anything from 2007 on at this point would be valid for you.
Great. I also have an individual asking, what will be the requirement for consultants who don't have a fixed schedule or don't have documents to prove it?
Sure. So that's a great question and one I can directly relate to, because that's where most of my experiences come from as well. In the case of consultants, what you'll want to do is confirm with your clients, if possible, what your hours have been. And if not, then with other partners you may have worked with on those projects. You'll still need to be able to go back and be able to justify that work experience with others after the fact, as an audit would be taking place. So you'll want to make sure that there's someone else who can verify that experience. But there's certainly nothing that precludes you from using experience as a consultant toward that requirement, so long as it was in project management sort of tasks and responsibilities.
Great. Let me look through these. It looks like a couple of them have been answered. Eugene asks, if my bachelor's degree included a project management course, can I count that towards formal project management training hours?
Yes, so long as you've taken that course, again, within the last 8 years, that would also be able to count toward this requirement. If it was specific to project management topics, you can count the entire course. But try and have a syllabus on hand that you would be able to use to help defend that and show that that was, in fact, the exclusive focus of the course. If instead it covered a broader range of topics and then a portion of it, say 20% of the course was spent on project management topics, then you can count 20% of the hours you would have spent in class toward that requirement.
Francis asks, is a sample of the application available so I know the format of the experience section? I'd like to enter my information into a spreadsheet before entering it on the application.
That's actually very smart, and that's one of the things that I recommend in that first course here at Pluralsight, is that you do so. And I show you the way that I set up my own Excel spreadsheet, because it's a great way to keep track of your hours in advance and write those different explanations and have them in place to where you can just go in and copy and paste those pretty expeditiously into the application. However, if you'd like to see the application itself, we do cover it in the video. You can also go to pmi.org, make an account for free, and begin the application process there. There's no cost that you incur to begin the application and to be able to look at it. Just know that if you do start an application, that starts that 90-day clock on that particular application being fulfilled. So you might want to do that from a secondary email address, for example, so that it won't impact you when you go in to actually filling your application for real several months down the road.
Great, great advice. I've got Amit Nandi asking, once you get your PMP certified, do you have to take another test to refresh it after 3 years, or can you just continue learning classes to keep it active?
Great question. No, you do not need to retake the test at any point after that, so long as you keep your certification valid. So again, every 3 years you'll have to have earned that certain number of PDUs in order to maintain your credential. If you fail to do so, you'll be put on a probationary status for 12 months. During that period, you can still earn the additional PDUs that you needed to catch back up. If you go through that entire 4th year there, the 3 years of the valid credential and then the year of suspension, and you have not accrued enough PDUs at that point, you would lose your PMP then, and you would need to go back through the entire application process and take the exam again. But so long as you keep it valid, you will not have to take the exam again at any point.
Thank you. I do have a couple of people asking if there's a way to get the current PMBOK.
If you become a member of PMI, you actually receive a PDF copy of the PMBOK guide for free. You can also purchase paper or Kindle or PDF versions separately, but that's one of the benefits of joining PMI, along with a discounted rate on the exam itself. Again, I covered that in some more detail in the first course, but I do recommend, if you're serious about pursuing the PMP, that you go ahead and become a member of PMI, at least for a first year, because it will give you that test discount, which is, I believe, equal to what you'll pay for the PMI membership, and then you'll get that PMBOK guide and a wealth of other resources for free that you can go along with that.
Great. I have a couple of people asking about your courses that are coming out this year. Do you have an estimate on when all 13 courses might be available on Pluralsight?
We're shooting for sometime late summer. That is a ambitious goal, perhaps, to some extent, but we have been pretty quick so far in getting these out, and I'm certainly committed to putting these together in as high a quality fashion as possible, as quickly as possible. So the first 2 courses are already available. They came out about a month apart. I would expect the gap to shorten somewhat in between some of the additional courses moving forward. The first couple, we had to lay a lot of groundwork. As we begin to move into each of the different knowledge areas now, it becomes a little easier to share the information needed more quickly and get each new section out.
I have Jonathan with a great question. He says, I am a lead web developer and do a significant amount of management on web projects done at my company, but I also do much of the development. How do I determine what percentage of the total project hours count as project management experience?
That is a fantastic question, and I think a lot of that is going to come down to what your personal judgment would be, and then also what someone else within your organization would believe would be accurate about that. Because remember, you do need to be able to take this back and have it validated. You need to have someone who can validate that experience, but it is a fine line. Sometimes when you are doing frontline project work, that is a form of management, because you need to have that, you need to have that understanding of what's going on, and you may be called upon as a resource. So oftentimes project managers aren't purely managing projects. They are also taking on those frontline duties, and so as long as that is in the service of the project at large and it helps to enhance your ability to lead others or to coordinate the project environment, I would consider that experience to be valid.
Great. I've got a couple questions coming in about the PMI audit. First, if you go ahead and pass the PMP exam, do you receive an audit then or up front beforehand? And if you do get audited, is there a template or a specific format that you should follow to get supervisors that can prove your experience?
Okay, so as for the first question, the audit takes place immediately after your application completeness review is finished. So you'll receive an email from PMI letting you know, hey, we have all of the information we need for your application. Go ahead and submit payment now. Once you have submitted payment, you're immediately notified at that point that you can either A, go ahead and schedule your PMP exam time, or B, that your application is coming under audit. If it's under audit, you'll have the 90 days to complete it at that point, and then you take the test thereafter. So no, the audit takes place very well before you would take the exam itself and can only take place prior to taking the exam. Now, if you come under audit, PMI will actually provide you with all of those templates and the information that you'll need in order to vouch for this. So you won't need to create your own system for doing so. They'll provide very specific instructions that you can follow to be able to get the necessary verifications and to submit that back into them.
Great. I've got somebody that's currently working as a network engineer, or they have a network engineering background. Is there value to them pursuing and getting their project management certification?
I think a PMP can be valid in almost any field. Honestly, I really do. Whether it's for that specifically, broader IT issues, or even outside of the IT environment, anywhere where businesses are creating new value through projects, or where projects are taking place, things that have defined start and ends and have a unique product at the end, a PMP is useful in all of those circumstances. So as long as your job involves you doing new or unique things on a regular basis, where you're going to be expected to create a new thing, a new initiative, it could be a deployment of new servers, it could be creating a whole new architecture of some sort. These are all things that could be considered projects and areas where a PMP could be useful.
Great. I've got Pedro asking, he states, I don't have enough hours currently to go for a PMP, but just enough for a CAPM. Do you suggest first obtaining a CAPM to accumulate hours and then go for a PMP?
Sure. The CAP would be a great intermediate certification, especially if you're in a project management environment already. So if you work in a project management office, or if your company follows a projectized structure where it's very gung-ho on projects as a way of doing business, then a CAPM can certainly be useful. Now, a PMP will obviously have even greater use and versatility moving forward, but it is a good intermediate step that can show that you are committed, even if you're still pretty early in your project management career, that you do have that level of commitment, that you're looking toward that. It puts you into that echelon of project managers and puts you on a good trajectory to earn that PMP in a year or two down the line.
I have someone asking, in regards to project management experience verification, do you need to get it from a supervisor, or could it be another team member, a business customer, an HR manager, etc.?
Great question. It does not need to come from a supervisor. So it could be a client, it could be a colleague, could be a business partner that you worked with on the project, and HR managers could also be that verification source. I know it can often be difficult to track down a supervisor, especially several years later. You know, people move on to different projects. They may not be clear on all the details in retrospect. Just make sure that whoever it is you intend to use as a verification source, that you do let them know that you intend to use them for that prior to submitting your application, to make sure that you're on the same page and that their recollection of the work that you did on a project is in line with yours. No different than how you would want to run by folks that you want to use as references on a resume. Let them know in advance. I would do the same with your PMP sources, but it does not supervisor.
Great. As you know, we have quite an extensive international audience, and I have someone asking if their bachelor degree earned from another country outside of the U.S. could be accepted by the PMI.
Yes, PMI accepts any degree that would be considered a 4-year degree or a global equivalent. So even if it's not called a bachelor's degree, so long as it aligns with that in the eyes of an objective resource, then it would count. So just, as long as it's at least a 4-year program, that would typically be the threshold at which that would be considered valid.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions as long as you're game for it. I've got John asking, in terms of, he says, should I rely on only on the guide for preparing for the exam or also on any additional resources as well?
So I found taking at least several practice tests prior was helpful. No practice test, of course, will align perfectly with what you'll actually see on the exam, but they'll certainly give you a good idea. And they can help to prepare you also for taking an exam of that length. Honestly, 200 questions, even though they're multiple choice, and if you're well aware of the material, they shouldn't be terribly difficult in most cases. That's still a lot. So just building up the stamina to be able to focus through all 200 questions may be a little more deceptively difficult than you might think at first. So I definitely encourage taking some practice tests in advance as well as studying the PMBOK guide. And then, of course, by actively paying attention to wherever you get those formal training hours, between that, the PMBOK guide, and some practice tests, you should be pretty well informed and ready to go for the exam.
Great. Maybe just one more question. I've got someone asking or stating that some companies they've worked for in the past don't like to disclose all the project details. Is it possible to enter generic hours without disclosing all of the details of the projects that you worked on?
Yes, I know that this is an issue in defense in particular, where you may have information that's not just corporate confidential, but that also falls under various levels of federal secrecy or state secrecy. So in those cases, you do need to be able to provide at least a generic description of the work that you have done. But aside from that, you don't have to get terribly into the specifics. What's more important is what your role on the project was. I led a team involving X number of people, approximately. Again, you can use a range if you need to, doing work within this type of subject matter, etc. So you don't have to get terribly specific in terms of what was accomplished, especially in cases where there may be a legal or clearance concern.
Great. Okay, one last question. I lied. I do have a couple people asking if you could tell them what the title of your first project management course is on the Pluralsight library.
Sure. It is Introduction to Project Management and the PMP Exam. And I believe that we'll be sending out a link with an email to all the participants that will have that as well. So you can look for that too.
Absolutely. Great. So I believe that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you so much, Casey. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. If you have any comments or any feedback, you can email us directly at webinars@pluralsight.com. Again, this webinar was recorded, and we'll email you the link in a few days. Remember to tweet about your experience today for a chance to win a free month of training from Pluralsight with hashtag PluralsightLive. And remember, as you leave, please fill out our survey. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.